Hello and welcome to the Unique CPA with your host, Randy Crabtree. We're committed to creating a thriving community of accounting professionals who are physically and mentally healthy, fulfilled, and energized by their work. Our ultimate goal is to elevate the reputation of the accounting profession and vastly improve the lives of those in it. The Unique CPA is brought to you by Trimerit, the specialty tax professionals.
Today our guest is Greg Kyte. Many of you probably know Greg or heard of Greg before, but Greg is a CPA, which I think is important to point out. In addition, he's a cartoonist, an MC, a CPE presenter, a stand-up comedian, probably the second stand-up comedian we've had on the show. He's co-host of the current podcast called Oh My Fraud. He's been the host or co-host of other podcasts, which we'll get into as well. I'm going to say this as well, whether he wants me to or not, but he has in the past been named one of the top, a couple times, I think, top 100 most influential people in accounting by Accounting Today, which I think is awesome. Greg, welcome to the Unique CPA.
I'm excited to be here. And just to give some context to that top 100 reference, it's true, but it was, I think, over a decade ago now that I was including that list. It's just because it wasn't that I was influential, it's that I was interesting. So
it's got influential. It doesn't matter. Interesting is influential.
I'll take it. I mean, I didn't refuse the award.
Right, nice. And I think it's like president. Once you're top 100, you're always top 100. It's that's what you're called.
You know what? It's funny. I was just talking about this with somebody else where I will falsely inflate people's expectations of me in any way that I can by saying that I was twice included in Accounting Today's top 100 list. Not going to mention that was in 2012 and 2013. I also, you said, as you mentioned, I was a stand-up comedian. I was the opening act for Weird Al Yankovic. Again, not going to tell people that was a one-off show at the state fair, at the Utah State Fair, and that was 9 years ago. So
in my lifetime, that was like yesterday. So
right.
that's
Right.
I would count that anything you got. I mean, it's an award, it's an event. You've done it.
Yeah.
You're still it.
That's true. It's true. So like I said, I'll take it.
Well, I gave you a quick intro, and I want to go into some of these things from the past that I know you've done, but you want to give us a little more background than I gave, because your current job is not in public accounting, but you are an accountant. And so why don't you give us an overall background of who you are and what you do?
Yeah, cool. I'll give you the broad look back. I in a former life, I was actually a junior high math teacher for 10 years. Wow. When I was in college. So I went to school started college at the University of Washington out in Seattle. And the big choice was, do I study math, which I was great at, or do I study accounting, which I had actually I'd been the bookkeeper. My mom owned a pharmacy for about 10 years in the Seattle area. And even as a high schooler, I was doing just her bookkeeping for her drugstore. And I loved it. I really enjoyed just the work of bookkeeping. This was back in the 80s. So I was using the 13-column analysis pad, and I was adding them up horizontally and vertically and making sure everything ties out then. And just the sheer satisfaction of a pencil paper calculation that was the size of 2 textbooks that it all tied out. You just go, nailed it. And you just feel so good about that. So in college, it was like, do I do math? Do I do accounting? I chose to go the math teacher route. And I very quickly learned that I made a horrible mistake and a bad life choice because I did not. Yeah. Cause you can pick a job that has high pay, but low satisfaction, and that might be okay. You can pick a job with low pay and high satisfaction, and you might be able to live with that. I chose a profession with low pay and low satisfaction, and so I was like, I got to do something else. So it was funny because for a long time I was like, the ship has sailed for degrees and advanced learning, but I was unhappy enough in my career that I did go back and I started just doing night school extension classes, the online courses that were available back in the mid 2000s. Got my accounting degree, got my MBA, got my license as a CPA, and started working as an accountant I got licensed in 2011. I started working as an accountant in 2008. I did 1 year at a public accounting firm. or as I like to say, 2,003 hours at a public accounting firm. And I was hired away by one of the clients. And so I've been working as a controller for a group of medical office buildings. That's been my day job for 14 years now.
14 years.
Yeah.
Holy cow.
Yep.
Was that 2003 billable hours or total hours?
No, that was total hours. And okay, here's the crazy story is that, like I said, I was with that firm. I got hired away by a client. When I was at that client, we decided to switch accounting firms before I got my license. And they were like, maybe don't, like even like coworkers were getting, do you really want, because it was my decision. And I was like, yeah, we need to switch accounting firms. They're like, do you want to do that before they sign off on your hours? And I was like, yeah, they're not gonna be weird about it. They were so weird about it. And they wanted to be like, oh, you only have this many billable hours. And I was like, come on, that's not how this is written.
So I don't remember the rules. Is it 2,000 hours you have to work to, satisfy, you pass the exam, now you got to work for a year and 2,000 was the number?
Yeah. So the way that it's written is 1 year working under the direct supervision of a CPA, and 1 year is defined as 2,000 hours.
Okay.
And again, then you go, there's nobody who's a first-year accountant who's getting 2,000 billable hours in a year. There's almost zero accountants, period, who get 2,000 billable hours in a year.
So what if I'm 60, I'll be 61 by the time this airs. So I don't remember anything. I remember sitting for the exam. I remember the room I was in. I remember that it seemed to go on forever and there was thousands of people. There might have been 10. It seemed like there was thousands of people and it probably was, but I don't remember. I mean, I was listening to one of your podcasts recently, which we'll get into, Oh My Fraud, but I was listening to one of these and you were talking about the ethics exam. Oh, and you do have another, at least short-term podcast called Drunk Ethics, I think. Was that
Yes. Short-term, and it might get pulled. We're actually we're under scrutiny by NASBA. That
really?
It might like something about, like the content's great, but they're like, but this brings disgrace on the profession or something. That's like their argument. So yeah, if you want to get your ethics, if you want to get the funnest ethics CPE you've ever gotten, you got to get your drunk ethics now while it's available.
Well, I did listen to some of that as well, and it was very funny. You could tell that there was some drinking involved. And let's set the stage, as long as we're going here, and then we can go back. Let's set the stage of what this drunk ethics is. Let's talk about that.
Well, again, I'll give you kind of the longer story. So I've been doing webinars and CPE training for a decade now. Do you know who the author Dan Ariely is? Does that ring a bell?
But I heard you mention him when I was listening to the podcast, but no, I don't.
Okay, so he's a behavioral economist. He wrote a book called Predictably Irrational. Fantastic. Arguably one of my favorite, if not my favorite, business book of all times. But he's a behavioral economist. He wrote 2 chapters in Predictably Irrational were about ethics. And then he expanded on that and wrote an entire book that was all about ethical behavior and how it's counterintuitive and how if you look at traditional economics, that it doesn't line up with, maximizing personal benefit and stuff like that. Very, very interesting. And I love him. I love his work. I reference it nonstop throughout my ethics presentation. And for one presentation, it was me and 2 co-hosts, and I decided, hey, every time one of us says Dan Ariely's name, we have to take a shot. And so we did, and it got sloppy. It wasn't bad. It was just, I had to hold the reins really tight by the end of the podcast to make sure we were delivering the content. And that gave me the idea that would be such a fun idea for an actual presentation. And Blake Oliver over at Earmark was the only guy who's ever shown any interest or support of that idea. And so me and a buddy, he's a stand-up comedy buddy of mine. We've worked together doing stand-up for a long time, done a lot of stuff together. He has an MBA and he's in marketing. And so he's my co-host, and we do 7 shots in in 50 minutes, and really in 49 minutes. We take one shot every 7 minutes while we're discussing the intricacies of professional ethics. And it starts out just super normal, and by the end, it's the same thing. He doesn't have a dog in the fight. He's just there to have fun. I'm like, going, we must deliver content. So the dynamic is he's having a party, and I'm like white knuckling the learning objectives, going, we must finish talking about this. So it's fun, but we got drunk doing it. And after we recorded all of those, I was worried that they were all garbage and unlistenable. And I was pleasantly surprised that they're actually a lot of fun. And that even when we're both bombed, we're still saying we're saying some pretty profound things. I was pretty happy with it.
Well, and we are a clean rated show, so some of the things we can always bleep out if we need to. But your co-host on the one, I think it was episode 3 I was listening to, by the end, he was using the P and CPA for a different term.
Yeah.
Which I think we could say on the show. Yeah.
Well, it's funny you mentioned, again, so I've re-listened to all of them, but there's a lot that doesn't stick in my brain. I remember him doing that, but I can't remember what he changed it to. And let's leave that as a mystery.
We will.
If you need to find out, that's episode 3 of Drunk Ethics. Go find it.
And I think it was 3. I'm pretty sure it was 3. So, all right. So I have to go back before they're pulled off the shelf. I'm going to have to go and listen to all of them and get my my ethics. I think I have until September of 24 before my next due date. So I have time.
Yeah. And we're fighting them on it. We're hoping that we can talk them through it and help them to embrace the concept.
So is it just the drinking part that they have a problem with?
Yeah, there was somebody who just, I think, was offended by the concept from all that we can tell, because someone took the time and effort to email every single state board of accountancy throughout the United States.
Really?
To like, I guess, tattle on it. I don't know, or because they were so concerned about it as a flawed model. And so his or her efforts brought it to the attention of NASBA, of the National Association, and almost just out of protocol, they had to launch an investigation.
They have to follow
drunk ethics.
All right. Yeah. All right. So it may not get pulled.
We're hoping not.
I hope so. We are also on earmark, so we don't want anything bad to happen to any of the shows on earmark. So we are going to make sure that stays. I'm going to start a petition. We're going to do that right now.
Thanks. Nice.
I just don't have all the emails for all the state societies, so someone else will have to do that.
There you go.
All right. So let's go back a little bit. Okay. We fast forwarded. Let's go back because what I was going to say when we're talking ethics, I honestly don't remember after passing the exam that I had to take a separate ethics exam. And you guys were talking about this on Oh My Fraud. You were talking about this. And do you know, did that come in later, or do I just not remember back in 1988 that I had to take an exam after I passed our ethics exam?
They have had that for a significant amount of time. Like I said, I got licensed in 2011, and part of my licensure was I had to pass a state rules and laws test specific to Utah.
Okay.
And then I also had to pass the AICPA has an ethics exam that covers it. And even now, if I'm remembering right, the AICPA one, when I took it, you had to get at least 90%, but it was open book. So it was not a difficult hurdle to overcome. But that said, there's been so many changes when it's come to ethical training requirements in the profession, even in the last 10 years. In the state of Utah, when I first became a CPA, we had no requirement for any ethics CPE. It was just it's wide open here. Get 40 hours in whatever you feel, 40 hours a year, 80 every 2 years, in whatever you feel like. And then it was just maybe 5 years ago that they implemented a 4-hour ethics requirement for that. So we're seeing that. But also, if you're talking the 80s, you're talking Sarbanes-Oxley, pre-Enron, that stuff. When when things really went, not that there weren't scandals before that, but we know that was a real inflection point in terms of public perception of the accounting profession, where there was a huge effort made to go, no, we're not all like that, and we're doing everything we can to make sure that people are doing things right. So I would not be surprised if that was a post Sarbox, post Enron change to make that test a requirement for licensure.
Yeah. I think if I remember, none of that stuff happened until you got involved in the industry. So back in my day, we didn't have anything go wrong. Nobody was doing any fraud.
Right.
There was no bad audits. There was none of that.
Yeah.
That's all. That's all a post.
They were like, this Greg Kyte guy is getting ready to get licensed, and so we need to tighten stuff up now.
Yeah. He's out doing comedy. He's drinking. He's got all kinds of things going on.
Bad feelings about this guy. So there's moral turpitude that's going to happen somewhere with this fella.
Well, so I'm glad they put that in place for you. That was very nice.
You know, got to get the guardrails up. It's one bad apple spoils the whole bunch. So,
all right. Well, so you're making me laugh, which is nice. That's part of I didn't tell you that ahead of time. We have 2 goals of the show. We educate on something that the accounting profession would find interesting.
Okay.
I think we've already done a little of that. Nice. And we laugh. Yep. Those are the 2 requirements.
Right on. So, okay. Well, this has been a great episode of the Unique CPA. Tune in next week.
Where we will drink and think. Oh, no. That's already Kenji and Matthew from Acuity got that.
Yeah, somebody else.
Darn it.
Shoot.
We are starting, and you know, I should give credit to Matthew May and Kenji Cormado, but we are going to be recording this Friday, and we didn't pick Friday. I know they have Fridays, but we're going to be recording the Unique CPA Happy Hour. The first version of the Unique CPA Happy Hour is going to be recorded this Friday. So
awesome. That's
I'm
fantastic.
very excited about that. It's going to be episode 100 we were recording, which this episode will be released after that one. So it's going to get a little confusing to people.
Right.
But the case
no, because, you know, in podcast land, like there is no chronology. You just, you hop around and you find the episodes that you like. So.
Kind of like this interview. I'm hopping all over anyway. So
no chronology.
This is how it works. All right. So let's get back to chronology for a second.
Okay.
Good segue. Thank you. And let's talk about, before we segued into 4 different directions, we were talking about your history. And the one thing I wanted to talk about is that you are, well, I had Jason Blummer on the podcast last week. Again, chronology-wise, who knows when that's coming out compared to this one.
Yeah.
But Jason, who runs his own CPA firm, Blummer CPAs, and Thrival, which is a community of accountants that is a really cool community, conferences and that. And I think you were part of this origination, the Thrivecast podcast, which started, 10 plus years ago?
Yeah, they're pushing 11 years now with the Thrivecast. 2011 was a big year for me. So like I said, I got licensed that year. I met Ron Baker in real life in the beginning of 2011.
Wow.
At one of the VeraSage symposiums. I got invited to that. Again, all of this just because I'm interesting, not because they're like, this guy seems like he's fun at a party. Let's invite him to this thing. So, I met Jason Blummer at that event that Ron Baker put together in 2011. And then there was this weird thing because podcasting was becoming a thing. Actually, even in 2011, it kind of felt like, I felt like it was we were kind of past the hump. Like it was
really
like we'd missed the front wave of this whole thing. But I was like, but maybe I could start like a some kind of business podcast. And I had actually just messaged a friend of mine that I was a comedian friend of mine who was also very interested in business and well read and things like that. And I sent him a message saying, hey, what would you think if you and I started a podcast? The very next day, Jason Blummer calls me and says, hey, what would you think about starting a podcast with me?
Wow.
And fortunately, I never even heard back from that friend. Because I told Jason...
Ever? In your entire life?
Oh, no, I've talked to him since then. But I didn't even bring up the message when I saw him. I was just like, okay, I'll take that as a no. And I hope it's a no because I already said yes to somebody else. So, so we started the podcast in the Thrivecast is what it's called in July of 2011. And I was his faithful sidekick for his podcast for 10 years, for 120 episodes. And after 10 years of doing it, it was like, we've done it. Because at first we had no idea what we were doing. We were just like, it was very much a fake it till you make it kind of.
I know what that is
thing.
like.
But after I don't know, 6-7 years, it felt like we'd figured it out and we had this podcast and we knew how to do it. And it was sort of like, okay, for me, I was like, okay, I've done this thing. I've kind of, cracked the code. I've done it. And now it's like, I feel like there's other stuff that I should be doing. So I gave Jason 18 months notice that I was going to be, because kind of like what you said, I was like, do this podcast for 10 years
Right.
and I'll feel great. So that was kind of the idea. It's like, hey, after we do our 120th episode, I think I need to go find other stuff to do. So that, and what was weird is that as soon as I told him that, then all of a sudden that like breathed new life. The fact that it was now like a scarcity thing with recording, because I love Jason. We're great friends. We're actually going to be doing a thing together next month or in like a month and a half for Bill.com. And we haven't worked together since last summer, and we're just excited to be able to do the Jason and Greg show again for a thing. But yeah, so I had a blast, and I was super sad when it was over. But also, I'm prone to overextending myself and overcommitting myself. So, having one less thing on the plate was a good choice.
Yeah, that's not. Sometimes I think I have that problem too. I have a hard time saying no to things. Yeah. Whatever it is. One, I'm just having the time of my life. I mean, I get to sit here and talk to you, and this is my job. I mean,
right. I hear that.
This be bad?
It's like, this is ridiculous. That this is what we can do.
Right.
So
you are the grandfather of, and I called Jason the same thing. He thought I was calling him old. No, it's just that you were doing podcasts probably in the accounting profession as long or longer than anybody.
Yeah, kind of. It's
so
weird.
You would think you'd be much better at it by now, but that's
no, I'm still just so rough around the edges.
I'm kidding. You're very good. I gave you a compliment beforehand.
You did.
Your sound is about as good as I've had on the podcast so far. So you're a professional.
Nice.
So, I mean, I really want to get to Oh My Fraud, because this is such an interesting podcast. But I also, your history just is so intriguing to me. And so one thing I just want to talk about, and you can expand on this however you want, but you were part of Going Concern for a while. So why don't you give us a little more background on that?
So to approach that, because I wrote for Going Concern for a number of years. Great website, still around, still being snarky and as a counterculture as ever. But what I did, and this is something that Jason and I just hammered on for the entire 10 years that I was working with him, is how accounting firms, one of the basics that you need to do if you really want to take your firm to the next level is you have to identify a niche. And for a lot of firms, it's basically like an industry niche. I specialize in this industry or this small set of industries. But with Trimerit, with your company, you also found a niche, but it wasn't so much with an industry. It was more like with an offering that you have, because with the credits, the business credits.
Yep, you got it.
Yeah, so finding a niche, it's super powerful, because if you find the right niche for you, like people will come to you and be like, please, I need your services. Please do this with me. And for me, my niche in accounting, because again, not in public accounting, I spent barely any time in that, but I'm still a member of the profession. And my personal niche as a personal brand was I was CPA plus comedian. And that's where that came together. That's why I got invited to Ron Baker's VeraSage Symposium. That's why Jason Blummer invited me to be on his podcast. I had been a licensed CPA for all of 6 months when he invited me to be on his podcast that was supposed to educate the accounting profession. I'm like, I'm the dumbest one in the accounting profession still. I don't know anything to talk about. But being able to bring that, so that's my niche. And so with that, I was also blogging for Jason. That was it was the podcast, it was blogging. I was going to his conferences and I was emceeing those as well. So it was kind of a basket of services that he was getting from me. But then those blogs caught the attention of the folks over at Going Concern. And that's when I met Caleb Newquist. That's when I started blogging for them. And I blogged for them for a bunch of years. And that's when the cartooning actually came in. At one point, it was so weird. I read a business book, and the business book was by a guy who was also in marketing, and he was like, you got to exercise different sides of your brain. And because of that, I draw, and that's what I do to exercise a completely different side of my brain. And I go, I used I was kind of an artist, like back in high school. I enjoy it. I enjoy doing. I was like, I dabbled just a teeny bit in cartooning a long time, like barely any, but I was like, I think I could crank out some cartoons. So I just made some. It felt like, you know how there's been this big resurgence in like adult coloring books.
Yeah. Yep.
Yeah. Just because it feels good to color. And that's sort of what I was getting from doing these cartoons. It's like, it's just kind of fun to do this. And I did feel like I was doing what that guy said and exercising this different creative side of my brain. And after I made a couple, I was like, I wonder if anybody like buy these. So I called Going Concern. I got a hold of Caleb and I was like, hey, I'm doing these cartoons. Do you want to run these? And he was like, absolutely not. I do not do that. And I was like, okay, fair. And then I went to Dan Hood at Accounting Today, and I sent him a couple. And I said, hey, what would you think about buying these from me and running them on Accounting Today? And he was like, these are not what we want to expose our audience to at all. And I was like, okay. And then shortly after that, Caleb contacted me. He was like, hey, on second thought, we'll do it. Which is also, again, I mean, I feel like my life is this stupid example of how a niche can like just make things work for you.
Oh yeah.
Because I've got friends who have been doing cartooning and doing they're so much better artists. They're so much better at making funny stuff out of it, but they would love to be able to just draw something and have somebody ready to snatch it up and send them a check for it. Like I felt guilty because of how poor my drawing skills were and that I was actually selling these things to people, but it's because those other friends that I had, there was no like focus to what they were doing. It was just funny cartoons that were drawn well. And you can find funny cartoons that are drawn well everywhere. But being able to go, no, these are specific to this one industry.
Yep.
And then all of a sudden you've got something that people can't find anywhere. And that scarcity and sort of that pent up demand that you didn't even know was there all of a sudden becomes a thing. So
yeah,
like I said, kind of stumbled my way into the right place.
Yeah, but you saw there's an opportunity. You saw there was you know your passion, you know what you like. You looked at that and how do I make this something that I can enjoy doing and as part of my profession?
Yeah. The
same thing happened with me with Tri-Merit. Kind of stumbled into specialty tax, but once I got there, it was like, I love this.
Yeah.
And then after I realized I don't even have to work and I can just talk.
Yeah.
I'm like, all right, I love this even more now.
Not too shabby. Yeah.
Yeah. So basically that's what I do. I do a podcast, I do webinars, I host a conference. You and I have talked about that. I write articles for Accounting Today and all these other, and so that never would have happened if I didn't develop the niche expertise. And so I think that's a huge topic we talk on this podcast a lot. People may get sick of it. I don't care. I think it's important.
It's step one of doing what you do. Because recently, how often do you listen to Cloud Accounting podcasts? Are you I'm regular?
I'm pretty regular now. I actually, when it goes live Friday, I usually get on when they're doing it live on Fridays now.
Nice. Yep. Nice. I just listened to one not too long ago, and they were talking about how CAS, that means like 15 different things.
Everybody's got their own definition.
Yeah, which is weird because it was eye opening to me because I thought it was client advisory services is how and everybody's trying to make a pivot if they're not already in CAS to move to CAS. But like I said, I thought they were just talking about advisory.
Yep.
But you can't be an effective advisor unless you pick an industry to specialize in so that you actually have something valuable to give to someone who says, hey, to even be able to pitch what you could do to somebody besides a tax return and a compilation.
Yep.
So yeah, it's step one, but it's also a step that a lot of people refuse to take.
Well, and it's part of it is if you're starting a firm and you're just hungry, you're going to take any client.
Yeah.
And you have to have some kind of, I don't know if the right word is, self-control to say no to some clients, because if you just be patient, patience may be the word. If you just be patient and you just concentrate on fast food restaurants or whatever your niche wants to be, or a service offering, like, salt. You want to be a salt expert or whatever it is. If you're just patient, you are going to have those come to you and you're going to be able to share your knowledge. Sharing your knowledge, I think, is extremely important. You're going to be able to share your knowledge. You're going to show that you have knowledge in this area, that you are an expert, and then it's just going to start to grow. And having that narrow focus, I think, is so important because it's one, you're going to probably love what you're doing a lot more because you're concentrating on something you enjoy.
Absolutely.
And it's going to show through. All right, I could talk niche all day. This is your podcast. You're supposed to be the expert we're talking about here. So.
Well, yeah, but hold on. Before we get too far from that, I do want to say that, what I think it's smart. It's not only necessary, but it's smart. So let's say you decided, hey, I want to start my own practice, and then anybody who you got kids to feed.
Yep.
You got you got bills to pay. So take everybody that'll let you do their work at first.
Right.
But the whole idea of that is to just become awesome as an accountant, so that just across the board, you're just really good, because you can't do anything if you just suck at what. So get great at just general being an accountant. But then during that time, you got to see what's coming to you, and you got to see what you like doing. And then at that point, you got to start. You do have to have the discipline to start going, okay, I might even have to actively start firing some clients or relocating to other firms, some clients that don't fit my niche. But it is a discipline, and it does come with risk. And as accountants, humans are risk averse. Accountants, we're like professionally risk averse. So it is a risk, but I'll tell you, it seems like it's a guaranteed payoff because like you said, you're going to enjoy what you're doing more, and you're going to be able to get paid more for what you're doing. So it's
paid more for sure.
Got to do it.
Yep. If you can work with less clients, make more per client, have a higher profit margin, have more free time, avoid burnout, all these things. I think niche expands to all those.
Yeah. And even I feel like so much of the enjoyment of what you're doing when you find a niche comes from the fact that you know that you are, your competence is through the roof, because you go, I know this industry backwards and forwards. I know the tech stack you need. I know the problems you have. I know how to fix the problems you have. And then you feel great because you're just you're Santa Claus for these guys going, here's this and here's this. I got you. You're done. You're taken care of. Send your friends to me.
Yep.
And that's your job. It's so good.
Yep. Oh, no, I agree. So you and I will have to do another podcast where we just talk about niche because I could keep going, but let's pivot based on one thing you kind of said before, being risk averse when we're building our practice or just as accountants in general. I think that may tie into, oh, my fraud, because there is risk out there and there's people doing things that are they're beyond risky. They're just illegal. Let's talk. You started this podcast, Oh My Fraud. How did that come about? And then let's expand on what type of topics you're talking about there.
So, Oh My Fraud was an example of my life backfiring on me because I had just made a very difficult decision to leave the Thrivecast with Jason.
You're right.
And like I said, I gave him 18 months notice. After I did that, I go, oh, this is really super fun. And I kind of am second guessing whether I should have given up, but I did it. And I was very much going, okay, podcasting check, did that. What's next? And immediately Caleb calls me and says, hey man, what would you think if you and I did a fraud podcast? And I was like, no, I absolutely not. I don't want to do a fraud podcast. I just got done doing a podcast. I'm trying to find other stuff to do now because I wanted new challenges. And I was like, I would maybe be interested in doing it if it was something where we felt like we could change the world doing it. But I, if it's just doing a podcast for doing a podcast, no. And throwing in the change in the world thing, that was my way of trying to gently say no.
Right.
That was my hell no, but as gently as possible. And so Caleb left me alone for 4 months, and then he calls me back up and he goes, hey Greg, I figured out how we can change the world with that fraud podcast. And the missing component was actually what Blake Oliver and Earmark bring to the table, where you can actually get continuing education.
Yep.
So I go, oh, okay. So we can create amazing content just on a content perspective. We can do the research. Caleb, he won't say it out loud. He's a journalist though. That guy, he's a journalist in his bones.
Yep.
And he wants, like, there's times where I'll put together the entire outline for our podcast, and he'll send it back to me going, I don't like your footnotes. We need like he wants more references. It's like, come on, we can't. So that's where he's coming from. But being able to do excellent content, and Caleb and I have done a million projects over the years together, and he's snarky and I'm me. And so together we have this fun dynamic that both of us really enjoy. And we're able to put together a very entertaining, very solid content podcast that people can listen to and get continuing education for. And then I go, okay, this really has the opportunity of becoming a big damn deal. And so, yeah, we started a little over a year ago. It was the beginning of 2022 that Oh My Fraud launched. So we're well into our second year now, and our numbers are looking great with it. And we're excited to do this for the foreseeable future.
And is that every other week, or how often is that?
Yeah, every other week. Once every
other week.
2 weeks. Yep.
And I honestly wanted to talk a lot about the podcast before we started. And we've had too much fun on all these other topics. But why don't we go through? Do you have a favorite episode of Oh My Fraud, or do you love them all like your kids?
I do. They're all fun. We've had a blast on every single one. Some of the more interesting cases that I feel like we've tackled. One was it was actually an earlier episode that I did. It was probably within the first, I think, 4 months of when we started. It was a company called Mutual Benefits Company, and it was a wild case because if you just pare it down to its core, it was a Ponzi scheme, is what it was. But it was interesting for so many reasons. What Mutual Benefits did is they purchased people's life insurance policies. So let's say you had a terminal disease, you knew you were going to die, and you were just like, I just need money to get me through the last little bit that I got here. Then my company, I could purchase your life insurance, which basically I'd give you a bunch of money for you to make me the beneficiary of your policy.
Right.
And obviously it would be a fraction of what the payout was because I got to make a profit on this, but it's supposed to be mutually beneficial. Hence the name Mutual Benefit Corporation, where you get money to live. And not only that, these guys, their specialty, because this was in the 80s, so they were really leaning into to people who were diagnosed with AIDS, because back in the 80s, you got AIDS, that was a death sentence. So that's what it seemed like. And they were even really leaning into, we're helping people who are suffering from this scourge that's hit the planet. And so there was really this altruistic side of stuff. But what they found is that there was treatments that were keeping people who had AIDS alive for their full, complete lifetime. And their gamble went completely wrong because their whole business model was based on the idea that these people were not going to live for very much longer, and they were living for a long time. Yep. And so basically what they started doing is they would find investors going, hey, give me your money and I'll buy a life insurance policy and you'll get this thing, which was their actual business model for a long time. And then it switched over to, give me your money. I have somebody else I got to pay out. Give me your money. And so it's so fascinating because a lot of times we think of Ponzi schemes as like they were Ponzi schemes from the moment it was thought up.
Right.
But it's interesting seeing a legitimate, and I'll put that in quotes, a legitimate business, because it also feels so creepy that these people's whole business was betting on people dying. So it's like, so there were so many facets of that I thought was so interesting. That's for sure one of my favorite cases, arguably my favorite case that we looked into.
So I thought you were going to say that they got so hard up for money, they just started killing people that they had these policies on.
They started hiring assassins that would go out and murder the people. Yeah, that would have gotten really dark. So, but yeah, fortunately, their company imploded before they got that desperate.
All right, so no murder involved.
Yeah, not in that one. We've had a couple cases that there's been murder as well, but it's fortunately it's few and far between.
You should talk to, I don't know if you know Dawn Brolin, but Dawn has an IRS case that there's a murder involved in that might be interesting to talk about. I'm not sure if it involves fraud or not, but that might be an interesting discussion to have with her.
Yeah, for sure. I always love a tip. That's been one of the fun side benefits of doing the podcast. We get regular emails from listeners going, "Hey, did you hear about this one?" And probably more often than not, it's like, "No, that was not on my radar at all." And then we start looking into them. Some of them are real good, real juicy.
Oh, I bet. And going back to niche, you're still niching because you're niching on this podcast on fraud events that have occurred in the profession.
Exactly.
All right. Well, one, I have a call in 3 minutes, so we are going to have to wrap up pretty good quickly here.
Yep.
But it is about time anyways. Before we do wrap up, one question, and this is based on, and I know I've talked to you about this before, but you know John Garrett, and I always give John Garrett credit for this, even though I was doing this before I met John Garrett, is I always ask everybody what their outside of work passions are. What do you enjoy doing when you're not podcasting or working for the medical buildings that you deal with?
Yeah, it's stand-up comedy. That's my love, just doing stand-up. I've got my own show out here in Utah that also has been getting some traction called Comedy Church. So yeah, stand-up comedy as much as I can do it. I love it. It feeds my soul it's so funny. I need spreadsheets and I need comedy because they're on opposite ends of the spectrum, but without either of them, I'm going to go crazy.
Well, you got both sides of that brain working then. That's pretty cool. You're like a Renaissance man.
Yeah, I think that's part of why I'm bald too. Both sides of the brain being stimulated, and it's just like
all the smoke coming out the top of your head.
No time for hair growth.
All right. And then if anybody would like to get a hold of you at LinkedIn, where would they look?
The best place to find me is on LinkedIn. So just, I'm Greg Kyte, CPA. Kyte is spelled with a Y instead of an I. And there's really barely any of us out there with that name. So Google Greg Kyte. You can really find all of my stuff as long as you spell that last name right. There's another Greg Kyte that spells his with an I, and he was a famous basketball player that played for the Celtics. Yep. He actually played for BYU, which is, I'm in Utah. So if I talk to people on the phone, they're like, "Oh, wait a second, are you the?" And I'm like, "No,
you're not that great."
He's a foot taller, but I think we weigh the same.
Yeah, he was 7'4" or something. I think he was pretty tall, whatever he was.
He was humongous.
Yep. All right, well, Greg, thank you so much for being on the show. I really appreciate it. Had a great time.
Yeah, me too.
I honestly would love to do it again. We'll schedule one down the road if you're up for it again.
Perfect. Sounds great. It was a blast. Thanks for having me on.
Thank you for joining us today on the Unique CPA. You can find the show notes for today's episode and learn more about TriMerit at theuniquecpa.com. Remember to subscribe and leave a 5-star rating on your favorite podcasting app. And join us next time for more expertise and insights on the Unique CPA. ProfessionalProductions.net